right, Ren murmured to Taro, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Even though I lost it, I could feel it for a moment. I still have a slight connection. It's still the foundation of my development, even though it's dormant. I still can. I can move forward. Julius and Selphira exchanged meaningful glances. They knew exactly what Ren was about to show everyone, and the implications of allowing it. But they had agreed that the people in this room could know. They had always been Ren's allies, possessed discretion, and understood that some secrets were worth protecting. Ren looked at those present, seeing recognition in their faces. "I'm going to do it," he announced. "I'm going to become the world's first natural four-beast tamer." The silence that followed was absolute. Even those who had suspected this was possible were left speechless, hearing such a direct declaration. Ren positioned the mantis egg in front of him and began the contract process. The mantis's base bonus was 40% in speed and attack, respectable though not extraordinary for someone at his level, but Ren hadn't selected it just for the bonuses. It was here for the synergies, for combinations that could transform the ordinary into exceptional. And then something happened that nobody had expected. As had occurred with his Wolverine, the mantis began connecting with the seed's roots. The connections formed rapidly, and the mantis began mutating in ways that defied its base biology. Elemental lines began combining to generate the same jade light from that time, but now it was slightly different. Now there were 3 extra beasts in Ren's system, 3 energy sources interacting in ways that had never been tested before. The energetic synergy began affecting not only the mantis, but also the diamond hydra. The crystals covering the hydra's body absorbed the light as well, their faceted surfaces beginning to glow with inner radiance. The jade mantis took its place in Ren's arsenal, but when the process finally completed, its bonuses weren't the expected 40%. They were now 50% base for all his beasts, a generalized tier 3. Beyond that, Ren felt an increase in his elemental control that went beyond what any individual bonus should provide. The 3 beasts were resonating together, amplifying not only their individual powers, but creating emergent effects that were more than the sum of their parts. The small mantis, about 50 centimeters long, emerged from the egg with movements that were paradoxically stoic, yet fluid. Its jade body gleamed under the room's light, each facet reflecting rainbows of color. The creature's triangular head swiveled, taking in its surroundings with compound eyes that seemed to see more than just the physical world. "Seems like it wasn't so bad," Ren murmured, a small but genuine smile appearing on his face for the first time since beginning the process. He looked at his hands, feeling the new power flowing through his system, but also the void where the complete connection with his fungus should have been. The absence was a constant ache, like a phantom limb that his mind kept reaching for. "I had hoped," he finally murmured, "to better understand crystallization. If I could reverse it." He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew whom he was referring to. Lynn stepped forward to place a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. Luna finally approached too, having abandoned her distant position. "So Mushito." "Didn't return," Ren admitted, and the pain in his voice was real. "But he's still there," he added more forcefully, his jaw setting with determination. "I still won't give up on recovering my beast capabilities to the maximum." He felt the new power flowing through his system. It was different from what he expected, but undeniably powerful. "Without my main beast completely recovered, reversing crystallization is far from possible," he continued, clenching his fists. "I'll have to keep advancing. Maybe if I get the rings the king was searching for." "Ren." Julius's voice cut through his thoughts. "Don't rush." Selphira nodded, approaching with an expression that had both pride and concern. "You must learn from your mistakes. Desperation has led you to dangerous places, both internally and externally." Everyone nodded with varying degrees of emphasis. The memory of corrupted Ren was still fresh enough to make them all uncomfortable. "The last thing we want," Min joked, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere, "is an evil Ren again. Now with 3 beasts, you'd be even more problematic." "And the other last thing we want," Mayo replied without missing a beat, "is an evil Min telling bad jokes all the time." The room filled with small laughs. Even Ren couldn't help but smile, though concern remained present in his eyes. Selphira waited for the laughter to fade before continuing. before going out to search for ancestral artifacts or face challenges that nearly killed our king. Her tone became serious. You also have to earn the right to do it. If you're a noble, you can leave more easily without having to do it the hard way again. She paused, meaningfully. For that, you must finish the 4th year and pass the tests, though I'm sure you'll be able to pass them easily, she added with a small smile. First he'll have to fight me at the end of the year, Leora interrupted, her eyes shining with competitive determination. Maybe he will not end with first place this time. This time you won't beat me on the final exams. Ren sighed deeply, but there was acceptance in the sound. You're right. There's still much to do. Zhao approached, studying Ren with the gaze of a teacher who had watched his student grow. The techniques you've developed are impressive, but don't let power make you forget the fundamentals. Creativity without discipline is chaos, and chaos, Yang added dryly, tends to explode in your face in spectacular ways. Ignatius, who had been observing silently, added his grain of sand. The brightest fire isn't necessarily the most useful. Sometimes, constant and controlled flames achieve more than dramatic explosions. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense activity. Then the last months passed with the peculiar speed of academic time, where each individual hour seemed eternal, but days flew by. And then, almost without realizing it, the end of the 4th year arrived. The exam was intense as always. The results were so close they had to verify them 3 times. Technical tie due to time limit, the professor announced with an expression of disbelief. Leora's group exchanged glances with Ren's. Then they smiled simultaneously. Next time, she promised. Next time, he agreed. The 4th year end vacation arrived with the characteristic relief of having survived another academic cycle. Ren was finally entering his 5th year, a milestone that had seemed impossibly distant when he'd started as the boy with the weakest beast. But today wasn't about academy or power or politics. Today, after so long, he would finally see his parents again. Ren stood before the now enormous door, his hand raised to knock but hesitating. How much had changed this time? Would they recognize the person he'd become? Would they be proud or worried about the path he'd taken? He breathed deeply, steadying himself, and knocked on the door. Ren stood before his new house's door, feeling both familiarity and disconnection at the same time. The 300-square-meter structure on a 1,000-square-meter lot was modest by the area standards, but compared to the small agricultural slave house on the outskirts where he had grown up, it was a palace. Before he could continue ruminating, the door opened, revealing a familiar face that made a genuine smile from him. Ren. Lee's mother and former neighbor from his old house greeted him with the warmth of someone who had watched him grow up. She now worked here, handling various domestic tasks that his parents had reluctantly agreed to delegate. Mrs. Chen, Ren responded, allowing himself to relax for the first time in weeks. How are you? Good, she said with an exasperated but affectionate tone. Though still waiting for your friend Lee, who hasn't gotten home yet. He's surely doing silly things with Tao, looking for girls at some dance hall or another instead of coming and greeting his mum. Ren laughed. Some never change. Could you let me know when they arrive? I'd like to say hello. Of course. Your parents are in their upstairs room preparing for whatever you're going to take them to do. There was a touch of amusement in her voice. They've been nervous all morning. Ren climbed the stairs with steps that became slower with each one. It wasn't nervousness exactly, but the weight of everything he would have to explain. The nobility, the territories, the responsibilities he had been procrastinating mentioning because he knew exactly how his parents would react. For him, all this was simply more homework. More obligations he hadn't asked for, but had accepted, because the path toward his goals passed through these kinds of concessions. The sessions with Arturo that Zhao helped him attend had been particularly tedious. Territorial management, resource policies, navigating noble hierarchies, an endless mountain of problems that seemed specifically designed to make any benefit feel insignificant in comparison, and the prospect of beginning to manage a larger area, surrounded by so many detractors who measured his every move, was frankly unpleasant. At least he had powerful allies, and even so. But his parents, they had enough dealing with the politics of not feeling out of place in this new zone. The transition from border workers to residents of a prosperous area had been difficult, filled with awkward moments where class differences had generated initially painful transformations. How was he supposed to tell them he was going to become something much more complex and grand? That he would have his own territory? That the political complications they were barely beginning to navigate would multiply exponentially? He reached the main room's door and found it ajar. Inside, he could hear his parents speaking in low voices. "I can't make this thing adjust correctly," his father muttered with evident frustration. "Let me help you," his mother responded, "though I don't have the slightest idea how this is supposed to look either." Ren pushed the door gently, and the scene he witnessed squeezed his heart. His parents stood before a large mirror, struggling with clearly expensive clothing they didn't know how to use appropriately. His father had managed to put on a formal tunic that probably cost more than all the clothes they had owned in their previous life, but had fastened it in the wrong order. His mother tried to help him, while also attempting to decipher how the decorative brooches on her own dress worked. Both looked uncomfortable, out of place, like children playing dress-up in adult clothes. "Need help?" Ren asked softly. Both turned immediately, and the expression on their faces when they saw him made all the stress of recent months worthwhile. "Ren!" His mother crossed the room in seconds, enveloping him in a hug that smelled of the familiar spices from her kitchen, and some new ones. "You've grown so much." At 14 years old, Ren was now considerably taller, and the build he had developed through years of training was noticeably different from the thin child he had been. But she had seen him 6 months ago, and he really hadn't grown that much. His father approached more slowly, his eyes evaluating Ren with the gaze of someone seeking to confirm his son was really all right. "You look different. A bit older," Ren joked, trying to lighten the atmosphere. "More serious and tired," his father corrected with concern. "Are you sleeping enough?" Ren couldn't help but smile at such a typically parental question. Here he was, having fought abominations the size of buildings, and his father was worried about his sleep habits. "Enough," he responded, deciding it was better not to mention the nights where his crystallization studies extended until dawn. His mother finally released him, studying his face with maternal attention. "There's something you want to tell us. I can see it in your eyes." Of course she could. His parents always knew. Ren breathed deeply. "Yes. There's something important I need to explain to you. Something I've been postponing." His parents exchanged glances, then sat on the bed's edge, giving him their complete attention. Their full attention here would have been maybe unnerving, but with an image that still looked fun with wrongly worn clothes, Ren relaxed a lot. "Life here has improved a lot for you," he began, gesturing toward the window that overlooked the patio where their improvised restaurant occupied 500 square meters. "The outdoor restaurant is going well, right? Better than we ever imagined," his father admitted. "The quality of ingredients we can get now, the variety, we've adapted our recipes and customers keep coming. We've become quite popular in the area," his mother added with shy pride, "though it still surprises me when nobles come to eat our food, even if they're low-rank nobles." Ren smiled. "Your cooking has always been exceptional. You just needed the right opportunities." "Thanks to you," his father said firmly. "All of this is thanks to you, Ren. The connections you've made, the people you know." "About that," Ren interrupted, knowing he had to say it before losing courage. "There's something bigger approaching. Something that's going to complicate things even more." The concern on his parents' faces intensified. They leaned forward slightly, their bodies tensing as if preparing for bad news. "As you know, I'm going to become a true noble," Ren blurted out, the words coming more abruptly than he had planned. "Officially, our surname will have a territory and everything that implies. It's not just any nobility. Grandmother Selphira won't stop until she makes us high nobility." The silence that followed was absolute. His parents stared at him as if he had just spoken in a completely unknown language. His mother's hand found his father's, gripping it tightly. His father's mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again without words forming. "Territory?" his mother finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "High nobility? Ren, how can we possibly—" "You don't have to do anything big," Ren said quickly, seeing the panic beginning to form in their eyes. "I'll handle all of it. You can keep being you, keep living your lives. I needed you to know what's coming." We are moving again, further in this time. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever was. This is not something I particularly want, Ren hastened to explain. For me, it's just more homework, more responsibilities. Arturo has been teaching me about territorial management, and it's honestly more trouble than benefit most of the time. But then why? His father began. Because it's necessary, Ren responded simply. To accomplish what I need to accomplish, to help the people I need to help, I have to be in a position where I can act with fewer restrictions, and that means high nobility. His parents processed this slowly. His mother was the first to speak again. But son, she looked at him directly, is this really what you want? Or is it just what you feel you have to do? It's what I have to do, he admitted. But, he added before they could protest, it's not just a feeling. It's something that truly matters to me. His parents looked at him for a long moment, then exchanged one of those marital glances that communicated volumes without words. All right, his mother finally said. If this is what you need to do, then we'll support you. But Ren, her voice became firmer, don't forget who you are. Don't let all this change what really matters. I won't. I promise. His father straightened, and Ren noticed he looked younger than ever. Both parents did. The fatigue lines that had marked their faces during years of hard work on the frontier had softened significantly. Ren, his father said slowly, his voice gaining firmness. We're double tamers thanks to you. Our tortoises have reached silver rank. As far as strength or level goes, we won't feel lesser than anyone. You can do what you need to. His mother nodded, squeezing his hand. Your father is right. What makes us feel out of place is an old idea more than a reality. We can overcome it without doubt, no matter how much time of discomfort it takes us. It was a moment of clarity that surprised Ren. His parents had been internalizing their social inferiority despite the fact that, objectively, they were no longer the powerless workers they had been. The new house we'll move to, Ren continued, taking advantage of the shift in their attitude. Grandmother Selphira sold it to me cheap. It's 10 times cheaper than its normal price, and 10 times larger than this one, more toward the city center. Everything is an improvement, though you'll need more employees. He paused, considering. As for the restaurant, you have the option of coming here traveling an hour to keep using this house as a restaurant, or starting a new one in the new zone. You can take your time to think about it. His parents exchanged long glances. Finally, his father spoke. Our son has to keep climbing the social ladder, he said with determination Ren hadn't heard in years. And we're not going to be in his way. We'll overcome whatever problems arise. Now, his mother added with a small smile, help us dress correctly in these ridiculous clothes because we clearly don't know what we're doing. The laughter that followed relieved some of the tension, and as Ren helped his parents dress appropriately, he felt a warmth that had been missing for months. In the end, no matter how complicated everything became, no matter what titles he acquired or what responsibilities he assumed, they would always support him. They were still his parents, and that was something no amount of nobility could change. Thanks to what Leora and Larissa had taught him, plus the maids, except Mayo, whose prankster advice would be a bad idea to follow, Ren managed to help his parents dress appropriately. The brooches were fastened in the correct order, the layers fell the proper way, and when they were finally ready, they looked like beautiful established nobles instead of disguised workers. The large vitality increases really did change people's complexions to something strangely clean and healthy. The journey to the new house was in a comfortable carriage that his parents still weren't completely accustomed to using. Ren observed their faces as they crossed through the increasingly prosperous district, seeing how their expressions changed from uncertainty to amazement. Ren thought casually that this was his third property. He recalled that he had also accidentally bought the land of their first house 2 years ago. Ren frowned, remembering. The previous owner and his former employer from the old restaurant had found them in the zone slightly better than where he himself lived. So seeing that they were now wealthy and had a better restaurant than his, he came demanding payment for damages, making a commotion at the restaurant. It was actually something fair. Ren had overlooked paying for damages, and his parents were collecting the money. They hadn't told Ren, thinking they'd pay on their own, but payments for various unexpected things had delayed them from getting the total amount in such a short time, and they were waiting to have everything before contacting him. The man was right that it had been improper not to notify him somehow beforehand, though he didn't need to make a commotion. However, he went too far. He tried to extort an unfair price, 10 times greater than the total cost of the house his parents were trying to save, and didn't even want to sell it at that exorbitant price. It was just a payment for damages. He continued remembering, shrugging, that he had paid those $5 million without complaint to get him to stop making a scene. It had seemed like little to him. His perception of money was already altered. His 10-year-old self would have hit him, and that should have settled it. But Larissa found out. A small smile appeared on his face. It had not ended well for the man at all. For some reason, he had recovered and doubled his money. He never knew exactly what she did, but it was effective. The carriage finally stopped in front of a structure that left both parents speechless. The mansion wasn't ostentatious in the sense of being flashy or excessively decorated. It was simply large, massive, the kind of property that communicated established wealth without needing to shout about it. 3 stories of pale stone rose before them, with tall windows that caught the afternoon light and made the entire building seem to glow. The entrance was framed by columns that managed to be impressive without being gaudy, and the ground stretched out in carefully maintained gardens that spoke of money and taste in equal measure. "This is," his mother began, then stopped, unable to find words. "Ours," Ren finished simply. "This is ours now." His father stepped out of the carriage slowly, his eyes sweeping across the facade with an expression of both disbelief and something approaching fear. "Ren, we can't possibly. We don't know how to." "You'll learn," Ren said firmly, "just like you learned everything else. And you'll have help, staff, advisors, people who know how to manage a property like this." His mother turned to look at him, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "How did we get here? How did our little boy become someone who can give us something like this?" "By being good, never giving up and working hard," Ren said softly. "Just like you taught me to." "And luck, lots of luck, having you as parents and unintentionally receiving from you the strongest beast." His father opened his mouth, closed it, then pointed toward a side wing courtyard. "And that is?" "Stables," Ren said, "for training tamers with transportation beasts." "How many employees with transportation beasts do we have?" his mother asked weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Currently just one, a gift from Victor, but later." Ren trailed off, realizing that explaining the full scope of what later meant might be too much right now. "And that?" His father pointed toward the extensive garden, his finger trembling slightly. The garden stretched out in organized rows, with sections clearly dedicated to different purposes. Some areas had rich, dark soil prepared for planting, while others already bloomed with colorful flowers that swayed in the afternoon breeze. For cultivating medicinal herbs and decoration, I suppose. Ren had to admit he was not entirely sure about all the garden's intended purposes. His parents' expressions became increasingly comical as Ren guided them toward the entrance. His mother's eyes kept widening with each new feature he pointed out, while his father's mouth hung slightly open in a way that would have been funny under different circumstances. When they entered, they were greeted by 2 guards Ren knew well. "Meiko, Shizu," Ren greeted with familiarity. "Thank you for being here." "Of course, young master," Meiko responded with a professional bow that made Ren's parents stiffen even more. But his parents already knew the guard girls. It was the additional staff that really surprised them. 2 maids and a butler, sent by Selphira and Julius, were positioned in the vestibule. Their postures were perfectly straight, their clothing impeccably arranged, each movement calculated to demonstrate years of professional training. "They'll be here temporarily," Ren explained quickly, seeing his parents' expressions. "To educate whoever becomes permanent employees about appropriate protocols and all that." The butler, a middle-aged man with perfectly combed hair and an expression suggesting he'd seen everything in his long career, stepped forward with a perfect bow. "Lord Patinder," he said with a perfectly modulated voice, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Lady Selphira speaks very highly of you." "The pleasure is mine," Ren responded, trying not to sound too uncomfortable with the formality. His parents, for their part, seemed to have forgotten how to breathe properly. His mother's hand found his father's arm, gripping it tightly enough that it hurt. If you'll permit me, the butler continued, I would like to discuss the staffing needs for a property of this size. He led Wren and his parents through a tour that revealed exactly how massive the property was. Is that, his father began, pointing toward a side wing. A private library? His mother completed, her voice rising an octave. Why would we need a private library? To store knowledge and not forget it, Wren responded. It'll be useful since I plan to write many books, and it already came with the house. There were also reception halls with vaulted ceilings painted in scenes of fantastical dragons, formal and informal dining rooms that could accommodate anywhere from employees, intimate family meals to lavish banquets, numerous guest rooms each decorated in different themes, extensive service areas with their own separate corridors hidden from view, kitchens that would make professional chefs cry with envy. The formal dining room alone could seat 30 people comfortably, with crystal chandeliers that caught the light and scattered rainbows across polished marble floors. The informal dining area was nearly as large, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. The guest wing had 10 separate suites, each with its own sitting room and private bath. The service quarters were a maze of storage rooms, laundry facilities, and staff housing that seemed to stretch endlessly. To maintain this appropriately, the butler explained as they walked, carrying the authority of someone who had managed similar properties for decades, I would recommend hiring at least 20 people. Perhaps 30 initially, to gradually eliminate those who do not achieve a certain quality standard. He continued listing the required positions: head chef and kitchen staff, groundskeepers, housekeepers, personal attendants, security personnel beyond the guards already assigned. Each category seemed to branch into subcategories that made Wren's head spin slightly. Wren sighed but nodded. There were many people he wanted to support with good salaries, and frankly, he did not have spare positions. Even so, there would be not only 20 or 30 people getting help. With each good salary, entire families could be supported. When they reached the back courtyard, his mother's eyes lit up. It was spacious, well-maintained, with enough space. We could put the restaurant here, she murmured, almost to herself. The butler cleared his throat discreetly. If you'll permit me, madam, I would advise against that option. All three pretenders looked at him. It would be looked upon unfavorably, he explained with diplomatic tact. A high nobility family operating a restaurant from their main residence communicates incorrect messages about financial stability and social priorities. He paused, then added, However, Lady Ashenway predicted something like this and permitted me to inform you that she can get you a good space near high client traffic at 10% of its market price. You could install a formal establishment there, appropriate for your family's new rank, but separate from the main residence. Wren did the mental calculations. That 10% around here was still a considerable amount, probably more than he had spent on his first two properties combined, but it sounded like an extremely good investment. He thought of Finch and Theodore, his financial advisors, who, when they learned about Selphira and Julius's help with the mansion, had dramatically died of envy, constantly commenting on the advantages of having powerful patrons who subsidized properties in their territory. This was exactly the kind of opportunity that would make Theodore pretend to faint with envy again. He should use it. I want it, Wren said finally. When can we see the available options? I can arrange visits for tomorrow, the butler responded. Lady Ashenway has already identified 3 potential locations she believes would be appropriate. Of course she had. Selphira rarely left anything Wren-related to chance after what happened at the beginning of the war with the Goldcrests. His parents still seemed to be processing everything. His mother walked slowly toward the garden's edge, touching the decorative flowers with trembling fingers. The petals were soft, well-tended, the kind that required daily care and attention. His father simply stood in the courtyard's center, turning slowly to absorb the magnitude of what was now, apparently, theirs. This is too much for our small family, his father finally murmured. Maybe, Wren responded, but it's necessary. When did you become so casual with wealth? His mother asked, turning toward him with an expression that mixed pride with concern. Wren considered the question. When I realized that money is just a tool. A useful one, yes. But in the end, only the purpose matters. What you can do with it. He paused, looking at the mansion he now owned. And I need to be able to do much more. The butler observed the exchange with the neutral expression of someone trained not to comment on his employer's family matters. The maids and guards maintained discreet positions too, present, but not intrusive. Then, Ren's father finally said, straightening, "We're going to need to learn quickly." "Very quickly," his mother added, "because we clearly have a lot to learn about how to live like this." She gestured vaguely toward the entire mansion, the expression on her face suggesting she still was not completely sure this was not some kind of dream. Ren smiled, feeling some of the tension in his chest loosen. His parents were going to be all right. Maybe not immediately, maybe not without stumbles and awkward moments, but they were going to adapt. At least that's what Ren hoped. He had already been working at the previous house, and all were former neighbors from his old home, people who had shared the misery of frontier life and now had the opportunity to work in infinitely better conditions. Among them, Ren finally saw faces he had been waiting for. "Ren!" Lee practically jumped on him, without a trace of the formality the butler clearly expected. "Brother, look at you. When did you get so tall?" Tao followed closely, grinning widely. "And so fancy. Is that tunic made from real black moth scales?" "By all the dragons." But it was the third who made Ren pause to observe. Anwar. His family also ended up under Ren's wing eventually. They had always had a bit more financial freedom when Ren was small, with several bronzes in the family instead of just irons. The snobs of the neighborhood. Anwar had gotten lucky with his grey egg contract, and instead of a plant or spore had obtained a frog. With help from Ren's cultivation methods, both the new plants and frogs were now almost all silver rank, or on their way to being so. The plants from the grey eggs were undoubtedly the beast for excellence for the vast majority of the population, the beasts of the masses. Yet their meaning had become something completely different thanks to the 1,000-day method and the cultivation method for new generations. Practically everyone could aspire to silver rank now. Those who didn't were lower rank just due to lack of immediate economic support, some by being late or not filling out government forms well, others by simple wait-and-see attitudes. But it was very rare to find someone distracted who hadn't received public support by not knowing about it. Mostly, for the many who had been slow to try the process, it was more about waiting to see that it wasn't some strange government trap, but they were now an extreme minority. Anwar had been the show-off friend of the four in their early childhood, and although he used to share, he was the friend who had always been slightly more distant because his family had a bit more money. That Anwar knelt before Ren with reverence that bordered on religious. "Lord Patinder," he murmured with a voice full of emotion, "thank you for this opportunity. My family, my silver rank frog, everything we are now is thanks to you." "Get up," Ren said immediately, uncomfortable with the obvious worship. "We're friends. You don't have to." "You're the Messiah," Anwar interrupted, his eyes shining with fervor. "You've helped so many. My frog is at Silver 2 now. Silver 2. 3 years ago, my family would have barely been able to pay for basic crystals for my current cultivation." Li and Tao exchanged amused glances as they pulled Anwar back to his feet. "Our friend has gotten a bit intense about the subject," Li explained. "But he's right about one thing. Our plants are silver only thanks to you." "Mine is about to reach Silver 3, Tao added with obvious pride. "Dad says he's never seen a beast evolve so fast." The butler cleared his throat discreetly, clearly disapproving of the level of informality, but Ren ignored him. "And your families?" Ren asked. "How are they?" "Mum saw you this morning. She's perfectly fine and will stay in the cleaning group," Lee responded, pointing to where his mother conversed animatedly with other employees. "She's excited to work here, even though cleaning will take much longer. She says the new salary is as big as the new mansion." "My parents will be on the gardening team," Tao said. "Dad won't stop talking about the interesting things you're going to cultivate here. He has lots of ideas." Anwar finally straightened completely. "My family. We were assigned administrative duties. If we pass the butler's training," he added quickly, glancing nervously toward the older man who watched them with an inscrutable expression. "You'll pass," Ren said with confidence. "Your family was always good with numbers and organization." The three friends looked at him, and Ren immediately noticed the differences between them and the noble students he saw at the academy. Lee talked with his hands, gesticulating exaggeratedly. Tao scratched wherever it itched without worrying about etiquette. Anwar, despite his religious fervor toward Ren, maintained a relaxed posture that no noble would adopt in the presence of a superior. They were casual, liberal, uneducated in the subtleties of noble etiquette. And honestly, Ren found that refreshing now. The small things that had been his normal felt like a great luxury at this moment. "So," Lee said with a mischievous smile, "tell us more about your academy. Are there pretty girls?" Ren felt his cheeks heat up. "Lately you guys don't get tired of asking the same thing every semester vacation. That's not relevant to." "Of course there are," Tao laughed. "Look how red he got. I've heard that most noble girls are incredibly beautiful when they grow up thanks to vitality increases," Anwar added, his tone more casual now that his worship moment had passed. "Is it true?" As if summoned by the conversation, Mako and Shizu appeared at that moment, their uniforms perfectly fitted, and their movements with the grace of years of training. The three friends were completely speechless. "Young master," Mako said professionally, "the maids and butler are asking if you're ready to review the training schedules." "In a moment," Ren responded, trying to ignore how his friends were looking at him with pure envy. When the guards withdrew, Lee was the first to speak. "Brother," he murmured with reverent amazement, "your life is unfair." "Completely unfair," Tao agreed. Even Anwar seemed to have temporarily forgotten his religious fervor, replaced by simple adolescent envy. The following 2 days were dedicated to visiting the 3 locations Selphira had identified for the restaurant. The butler insisted that both of Ren's parents learn to evaluate properties appropriately, so the visits became improvised lessons about location, traffic flow, and architectural considerations. And during the second visit, they experienced an encounter with one of those called clueless nobles. A young noble, probably 17 or 18 years old, observed them with an expression of obvious disdain as they examined the space from outside. His tunic was embroidered with the emblem of a minor house, and he clearly hadn't received the memo about exactly who Renpatinda was. "Disguised workers looking at properties in this district," he muttered loudly enough to be heard. "What's next? Beggars in the royal palace." Ren's parents immediately tensed, their years of experience with social contempt activating automatic responses to shrink and apologize. But Ren simply turned toward the young man with a neutral expression. "This property," he said calmly, "is being considered for my family. Is there a problem with that?" Evaluated him, clearly trying to determine if Ren was someone important or simply audacious. His eyes swept from Ren's expensive off-colored tunic down to his polished, comfortable first boots, then back up again with growing confusion. The clothing style screamed new wealth, and the face was unfamiliar. "Your family," he repeated, with a tone suggesting disbelief, his lip curling slightly. "And who exactly are you?" Ren simply looked at the noble without changing his neutral expression and sighed, somewhere between bored and annoyed at this type of thing. He'd dealt with enough entitled nobles at the academy to recognize the pattern, the posturing, the assumed superiority, the need to establish dominance over anyone perceived as inferior. The butler, positioned discreetly behind Ren, considered intervening. His hand twitched toward his side, where a formal introduction card rested, but it was only correctly used for higher-ranked nobles than his employer. And speaking now would also diminish his young employer, would make it seem he needed to be defended by someone of lower rank than the aggressor, so he only clenched his jaw and waited, even if his decades of service were telling him this would not end well. The property agent, a middle-aged man who clearly wanted to avoid trouble, didn't think so deeply, so he cleared his throat nervously, his voice coming out higher than intended. "Excuse me, young lord, but this is Lord Renpatinda." The young man raised a hand in front of the agent's face to silence him for his impertinence. The gesture was dismissive, the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of never being challenged. There was a moment of silence while the name registered. The young noble blinked, frowned, clearly searching his memory for whether he should recognize that name. His expression cycled through confusion, consideration, then settled back on arrogance. He finally thought that he did not know any important Patinda. "I don't care who they are," the noble interrupted with disdain, waving his hand as if swatting away an insect. "If they don't know their place, someone has to teach it to them." Had he just threatened his parents too? It was then that something changed in the air around the noble. Subtly at first, then more obvious. His hair began moving as if a breeze touched it, except there was no breeze anywhere else. The carefully styled locks lifted and swayed in an invisible current. The noble frowned, trying to turn around, but discovered his feet had lifted slightly off the ground. What? His eyes widened as he rose several more centimeters, his boots now dangling uselessly above the cobblestones. Ren hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, hadn't even shifted his weight or changed his breathing. He just watched him with those eyes that now subtly glowed with jade light full of elemental power. The noble spun in the air involuntarily, making a complete rotation before he could react. His arms pinwheeled, trying to find purchase in empty air, his carefully maintained dignity crumbling with each undignified flail. "How dare you?" he roared, his wounded pride overcoming his common sense. His face flushed red with humiliation and rage. "I'm an 8th-year student at Silver 3 rank." He activated his fusion with the desperate intensity of someone whose world was suddenly not following the expected script. His elemental Wolverine merged with him in a flash of light and energy, a beast popular among nobility, and this one was in a perfect situation, because he had directed his cultivation toward wind affinity itself. The noble's control over the element shot up to 300% Tier 3, enough to dominate most wind elemental beasts even of his same rank. Power flooded through him, the familiar rush of fusion making him feel invincible again. He immediately tried to cancel the control Ren had over the surrounding wind, pouring his enhanced will into the air currents. He could feel them, sense every eddy and flow, and he reached out with his powerful Tier 3 control to seize them, thinking about the endless ways he would use to recover his dignity. He would slam this upstart into the ground, make him grovel, and teach him what real power looked like. Nothing happened. The wind kept moving exactly as Ren wanted, completely ignoring the fused noble's attempts to influence it. It was like trying to push against a mountain. No, worse, like pushing against something that didn't even acknowledge his existence. "Impossible," the noble murmured, his face paling as the reality of the situation began to sink in. His Tier 3 control should have at least created some resistance, some pushback. But there was nothing. What kind of windmaster is helping you? The noble tried to perceive energy around them, extending his enhanced senses to find the hidden expert hidden behind the hypothetical curtains who must be assisting this boy. But there was nothing. No signature, no presence, no indication of any external interference. It was impossible, he thought. The brat was not even fused. The noble began spinning in the air much faster now, the world becoming a blur of colors and shapes. His stomach lurched as the rotation accelerated, soon becoming dizzy and disoriented. The carefully prepared breakfast he'd eaten that morning began its unwelcome journey back up his throat. Ren finally spoke, his voice soft but charged with power that made everyone present except his parents feel a chill run down their spines. "No master, just a young man who has almost 500% elemental control, in all elements." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 500%, all elements. The implications were staggering, impossible, the kind of thing that shouldn't exist outside of ancient legends. To emphasize the point, the wind that had been manipulating suddenly cooled dramatically. The temperature plummeted so fast that moisture in the air condensed instantly. Ice crystals began forming in the air around the noble, water fusing with wind to create a miniature ice storm that surrounded him completely. Each crystal caught the light, creating a dazzling but terrifying display of elemental mastery. Beamed as the cold penetrated his flesh and bones, cutting through his fusion like it wasn't even there. The supernatural chill froze the sweat on his skin instantly and made his teeth chatter so violently he bit his tongue. "Let me cool your head a bit more," Ren murmured, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone adjusting the temperature in their bath, and the temperature dropped even further. Moments later, the noble fell to his knees the instant Ren released him, vomiting violently from the combination of dizziness, from the involuntary acrobatics, and the shock of extreme cold. His breakfast splattered across the expensive cobblestones, chunks mixing with bile. He trembled so hard he could barely keep his fusion active, the connection to his beast flickering like a candle in a hurricane. It was then that the property agent, who had been discreetly trying to move away from the confrontation, cleared his throat nervously. Lord Patinder is under the patronage of Lady Ashenway, he explained carefully. And he's a candidate for his own nobility at the beginning of his adult year, this New Year's Eve ceremony for 5th years in a few days. The name Ashenway hit like a physical blow. The noble's eyes widened even further, horror replacing the last vestiges of his arrogance. "I'm sorry," the noble managed to say between gags, spittle and vomit dripping from his chin. "I didn't know. Forgive me, please." Ren released his control gradually, allowing the air to return to normal temperature degree by degree. The ice crystals began to melt, creating a light mist that sparkled in the sun. The noble collapsed completely on the ground, shivering uncontrollably, soaked in cold sweat and vomit, his expensive clothing ruined and his dignity obliterated. "Next time," Ren said calmly, "consider respecting people. Maybe what you see as inferior isn't what it seems. Now leave." Dizzy and feeling terrible, the noble tried to pretend to be knocked out, hoping that unconsciousness might spare him any more suffering. But when Ren began moving the air again, just a subtle shift that promised more punishment, he dropped the act and crawled as best he could toward the exit. His dignity could indeed go lower. The butler had a small smile of satisfaction on his normally expressionless face, the kind of subtle pleasure that came from watching arrogance meet its match. And Ren's parents, who had been ready to intervene with their new silver beasts, so close to letting maternal and paternal instincts overriding any consideration of rank or propriety, understood again, and with more intensity, that their son no longer needed anyone to protect him. If anything, they might be the ones who needed his protection now. Ren let the moment extend for a few seconds before simply nodding and continuing with his property inspection, as if the exchange hadn't been important. But he had sent a message, and he knew the story would spread. The 4th day brought a different lesson. Ren had been at the castle for a few hours handling some matters, when he returned to find the butler scolding his parents in the courtyard. "With all due respect," the butler was saying in a tone suggesting it wasn't the first time he'd had this conversation, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of restrained exasperation, "you cannot be seen working manually in the garden. Not when there are employees specifically hired for those tasks." His mother had dirt on her hands, her cheeks flushed from exertion. She'd clearly been helping the gardeners with the new herbs, unable to resist the pull of physical work she'd done her entire life. His father had been moving some of the enormous, heavier pots, decorative pieces that weighed hundreds of pounds, using his improved double tamer strength without thinking about the social implications. "We were just helping a little bit," his mother protested, carrying a bewildered and hurt voice of someone being scolded for trying to be helpful. She wiped her hands on a cloth, smearing more dirt than removing it. "I don't understand the problem." "The problem," interrupted one of the maids sent by Selphira, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper awareness of social dynamics, "is that the neighboring nobles are watching. And when they see the lords of the house working like servants, they form opinions about the legitimacy of their status." She gestured subtly toward the neighboring properties, where Ren could now see curtains twitching in windows, faces peering out to observe the spectacle of the supposed nobles doing manual labor. Ren saw how his parents struggled with understanding that they now had to play a role constantly, even in their own home. The confusion and hurt in their expressions made his chest tighten. They'd worked hard their entire lives, taken pride in that work, and now they were being told that very work ethic was inappropriate. Ren was surely going to have to send many more messages in the future to establish that his family's legitimacy wasn't up for debate. "It's ridiculous," his father muttered that night as they sat in the informal dining room, his hands clenched around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "I'm perfectly capable of moving my own pots." "I know," Ren responded softly, reaching across the table to touch his father's arm. "But that's how this world works. It's not about capability, it's about perception. And wasn't that the truth that governed everything in noble society? Not what you could do, but what others thought you could do. Not who you were, but who you appeared to be. The 5th day of vacation brought uninvited visitors that promised complications of an entirely different nature. A middle-aged noblewoman, accompanied by her daughter, approximately Ren's age, appeared at the main door with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The mother's smile was calculated, practiced, the kind that came from years of social maneuvering. The daughter's was more genuine, but carried an edge of nervous anticipation. Celeste, the noblewoman introduced with a smile that tried too hard to appear casual. Her hand rested on her daughter's shoulder with just slightly too much pressure. She's 14 years old, is a tamer of a silver rank beast, and has been educated in all the appropriate arts for a noble wife. Celeste, a girl with chestnut hair and a timid expression, performed a perfect curtsy. The movement was flawless, practiced countless times until muscle memory made it automatic. Ren immediately noticed how her eyes evaluated the mansion before looking at him. "A pleasure to meet you," Ren responded with automatic courtesy, while internally trying to process what was happening exactly. The butler, positioned discreetly nearby, had an expression that suggested this was exactly what he had expected. There was almost resignation in the slight downturn of his mouth. Lady Moravan didn't waste time. "Our family has fallen on difficult times lately, but taking advantage of the nouveau riche before others would be a gift from heaven. I'm sure we could recover our previous status." There was the reason, laid bare by her poorly controlled manner that broadcast her thoughts like a town crier. They weren't here for who Ren was, but for what he represented, a convenient social ladder. Ren was formulating a polite response when another visitor arrived. Lady Moravan wouldn't be the only one to appear. She was simply the first. This one was different. A young noblewoman, perhaps 16 years old, who arrived without her parents, accompanied only by a maid. Her bearing was confident, her stride purposeful rather than hesitant. "Lord Patinder," she said with confidence that contrasted completely with Celeste. "I'm Victoria Thornhill. I've heard about your cultivation methods and your participations in the kingdom's defense. I wanted to meet the great and powerful man behind all those achievements." She didn't mention marriage. Didn't need to. The intention was clear in how she positioned herself, in how her poorly controlled manner revealed much more easily than any of his elite schoolmates would have. She was revealing genuine interest and liking when she evaluated him. Her eyes lingered on his face, his arms, his posture with an assessment that had nothing to do with political advantage. Ren swallowed hard. And then another arrived. And another. By midday, Ren found himself trapped in what could only be described as a parade of nobles presenting their daughters. Some were clearly opportunistic, declining families seeking a lifeline. Their desperation showed in over-enthusiastic compliments and exaggerated accounts of their daughter's accomplishments. Others seemed genuinely impressed by his achievements, their respect colored by calculation about how an alliance might benefit both parties. And a few, the most concerning, were girls who arrived on their own account, perhaps recognizing that Ren was probably one of the best matches available for their generation. These ones were dangerous. They'd chosen him, which meant they had the most agency, intelligence, and determination. Li, Tao, and Anua observed from their positions near the garden entrance, their expressions changing from amusement to disbelief to pure envy. "He's the damn Messiah," Anua murmured with amazement. "He has a harem of nobles forming in his garden." "It's not a harem," Tao corrected, though he sounded less convinced with each new arrival. "It's just many noble girls who will probably marry him." "That's literally what harem means," Li pointed out. By the time the sun began setting, Ren had met more than 20 potential suitors. The butler finally had to intervene, establishing a system of scheduled appointments for the future, because clearly this wasn't going to stop anytime soon. The 6th day brought a different type of visitor. The first young noble arrived early. His expression was pure resolve and something darker, jealousy and wounded pride in equal measure. "I heard about the incident where you defeated a noble without using your hands," he announced without preamble. His jaw clenched tight enough that muscles jumped in his cheek. "It must be an exaggeration, but surely you're not weak, so antagonizing you is a bad idea. However, I also heard about Celeste visiting you yesterday." "Oh." Ren immediately understood that sensation in the manner. This wasn't about politics or power. It was personal, raw, the kind of emotion that made young men do stupid things. But did wealthy or noble people normally not know how to circulate mana or use artifacts to hide it? Ren was realizing his school taught at an even better level than he'd thought, though in reality, much of the reason for the increased skill and capabilities was him, and he had underestimated his own impact. "Celeste and I have been informally engaged by our families for years," the noble continued, his voice trembling with contained emotion. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. until her mother decided you were a better match. I don't, Ren began. Prove you deserve her, the noble interrupted, activating his fusion with all his desperate energy. He was silver too, with a 3-horned horse, a beast that gave him increased speed. Ren sighed. He didn't want to do this, but apparently he had no choice. He extended his hand casually, and the weight of shadows fell upon the noble like a physical blanket. It was a technique he'd seen Sirius use, and although Ren's control over shadows was less than Sirius's when fused, his 500% general elemental control was more than enough against a silver too. The noble froze in place, unable to move while shadow pressure kept him completely immobile. His eyes widened with panic as he realized he couldn't even twitch a finger, couldn't activate any techniques, couldn't do anything but stand there like a statue. I don't know what situation you think exists, Ren said honestly, but this won't change anything. Besides, I'm not interested in a family that only seeks its own benefit. After exhausting him for a while, watching sweat bead on his forehead from the effort of trying to move, Ren released the noble, who collapsed to his knees gasping for air. But he wouldn't be the last either. Throughout the day, more arrived, some motivated by romantic jealousy, hearts broken by redirected engagements or unrequited feelings. Others simply wanting to test if the rumors about Ren's strength were true, driven by competitive spirit or the need to establish dominance. Ren handled them with creative variety. One was gently blown backward with a wind gust that intensified until it left him rolling through the garden like a tumbleweed, collecting leaves and dirt in his expensive clothing. Another discovered the ground beneath his feet had become quicksand, burying him up to his neck while his beast flailed uselessly nearby. A third began sweating profusely when Ren raised the temperature around him with walls of fire to unbearable levels, his fusion doing nothing to protect him from the supernatural heat. The garden and the area outside the wall began filling with failed challengers in different states of defeat. Some semi-frozen, ice crystals forming in their hair and on their eyelashes, others hanging upside down from nearly indestructible trees, their faces red as blood rushed to their heads. A few simply passed out from dizziness after being spun repeatedly, their inner ears completely overwhelmed. By late afternoon, the scene resembled a battlefield more than a noble estate's garden. Li, Tao, and Anwar observed from their less privileged position, their initial envy transforming into something more complex, a vicarious pride and dawning realization of just how far their friend had climbed. "Brother," Li murmured, watching another defeated noble being helped away by his embarrassed family. "We're never going to have these kinds of problems." "Speak for yourself," Tao responded, though his voice carried more hope than conviction. "As soon as I get into gold rank thanks to Ren's cultivation methods, surely." "Oh look, here comes another noble. This one was different. Younger, probably 14 like Ren, but clearly more brave than most, or perhaps just more foolish. His face was set with boldness that bordered on recklessness. "My parents said I shouldn't come," he declared as he approached, his voice cracking slightly with adolescent intensity. "But you defeated my older brother yesterday. Nobody defeats a member of the Ashford family without consequences." He activated his fusion, revealing he had contracted a hawk-type beast that gave him increased wind control. He was only Silver 1, but clearly trusted in his abilities, his posture radiating confidence of someone who'd rarely lost a fight. Ren sighed, bored of all this but ready to give another quick lesson. It was then that Tao stood up. "Hey, Ren," he shouted from behind, his voice carrying across the garden. "Can we try? This one seems even below our level. If he can't defeat us, he has no right to waste your time." Ren considered for a moment, then smiled. "Why not?" The three friends looked at each other grinning and came running, their own beasts materializing in flashes of light. Li's and Tao's plants, now at silver rank, were dramatically different from the weak versions nobles were accustomed to facing. Their vines were thick as a man's arm, and fast as striking snakes, their tendrils strong enough to restrain opponents of similar rank without difficulty. The conventional battle against plants that nobles remembered, against vines they could easily break, was over. Plants were now problematic beasts, versatile and more useful than many other far more popular beasts. The foolproof public cultivation method had changed everything about how they functioned in combat. And Anuar's frog, dark and massive with skin that glistened like wet obsidian, could control water, and became incredibly heavy when it activated its special ability. The creature was massive. Noble Ashford looked at them with disdain, his lip curling. Workers? Seriously? But his expression changed rapidly when the battle began. The plants at this level had developed legs, moving with speed and coordination their iron or bronze equivalents had never shown. They scuttled across the ground, their movements unnaturally fluid for plant-based creatures. Anua's frog also amplified the plant's power and growth with its water control, creating a synergistic combo the noble clearly hadn't anticipated. Moisture in the air condensed around the vines, making them swell and strengthen, their speed going up even more and their grip becoming ironclad. Noble Ashford had no time to react, or even fly. In less than a minute, he was wrapped in unbreakable vines, with the enormous frog placing a webbed foot on his chest and applying enough weight to make breathing difficult. "Do you surrender?" Lee asked with an enormous smile, showing his poorly contained glee. The noble, unable to believe he'd been defeated by workers, could only nod weakly, his face red from exertion and humiliation. Lee, Tao, and Anua looked at each other, then burst into victorious laughter. "We did it!" Tao shouted, pumping his fist in the air. "We defeated a noble!" Their envy of Ren hadn't completely disappeared, but now it was mixed with their own pride. Maybe they didn't have processions of noble suitors or massive mansions, but they had real power. Power they'd earned through hard work and methods Ren had shared freely with anyone willing to put in the effort. By the time night fell on the 6th day, the garden resembled a comic battlefield. Challenges in various stages of defeat decorated the landscape like living warnings not to underestimate Ren Patinda or his allies and workers. The 7th day arrived too quickly. Ren had to return to the academy, and afterward would come the extra nobility exams before the ceremony where he, Luna, and Leora would officially receive their noble titles. Larissa would be there too, but as a royal, she received everything automatically without need for ceremony or special examination. This last day of vacation dawned with a line that extended to the street. Suitors. More suitors than Ren had believed possible could exist in a single district. Young women in expensive dresses, some accompanied by chaperones, others by their entire families. The line stretched like a merchant queue on market day, except instead of goods, they were all there to evaluate him. "This is absurd," he muttered, while observing the procession from his window. The butler appeared at his side, materializing with the silent efficiency he'd perfected over decades. "It's the price of being one of the best matches of your generation, young master. Emerging noble with powerful connections, revolutionary cultivation methods, and verified combat feats. From a matrimonial perspective, you're extremely valuable." Ren sighed. He knew he'd have to deal with this eventually. He just hoped for more time to relax with his parents and friends. Lee, Tao, and Anua arrived early to say goodbye, but stopped dead seeing the line of nobles waiting. "Brother," Lee said weakly, his eyes wide as they swept across the assembled crowd. "This is ridiculous," Tao completed. "The Messiah is truly building a giant harem," Anua murmured with reverence, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. They were in the middle of contemplating the scene when an elegant carriage stopped in front of the mansion. It wasn't just any carriage. The Ashenway, Dravenholm, and Starweaver emblems gleamed on the sides, each one representing power that made the assembled nobles pale in comparison. The line of suitors immediately parted, recognizing superior authority. Several actually curtsied or bowed as the carriage passed, automatic responses to recognize power. The carriage door opened, revealing Leora, Larissa, and Luna, all dressed in formal tunics that communicated their status without need for words. Their maids and guards surrounded them, creating a procession that made the suitors seem like amateur attempts in comparison. The three noble women observed the line of girls waiting, then looked at Ren in the distance with expressions mixing confusion, exasperation, and something more possessive. "Ren?" Leora called with a dangerously sweet tone. "Would you like to explain what's happening here?" The three friends were in complete silence. Lee had to manually close Tao's mouth. Tao seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Anua murmured prayers about the Messiah and his blessed harem. "It's not what it looks like," Ren began weakly. "Isn't it?" Leora crossed her arms. "Because it looks like there are approximately 100 girls outside waiting to see you." Luna maintained her neutral expression in silence, but dark mana surrounded her, and it wasn't her shadow mana. Larissa simply observed the scene with an analytical expression and smiled. After asking Ren if he wanted a rescue, he nodded with a slight smile, but asked for a moment to say his goodbyes. When he moved away a bit to enter the mansion, he passed by his friends. The three still remained completely immobile, looking alternately at the three incredibly beautiful noblewomen and back at Ren. "Those are," Li began weakly. Ren's friends, Tao completed, his voice rising 2 octaves. "But why do they treat him like jealous wives? I see now. The Messiah already has a better harem," Anwar murmured with reverent amazement. "Quality over quantity." "It's not a harem," Ren protested, feeling his cheeks burn. But when he was surrounded by Leora, Larissa, and Luna, with their respective guards and maids creating a protective circle of beauty and competence, he couldn't deny the image he presented was interesting. Ren sighed and entered the mansion. After reminding his parents not to miss a single day of the 10,000-day method and giving them a big hug, plus saying goodbye to the worker neighbors, he finally returned. His friends, still frozen in the same place, also said goodbye. "I still can't believe what you've accomplished," Li said, looking at the mansion with amazement that hadn't diminished during the week. "It's like a dream, and you're going to be an official noble," Tao added. "Will you remember the little people when you're important?" "He's already important," Anwar pointed out. "He's the Messiah." "Please stop calling me that," Ren muttered. "No, let us tease you at least." "Your life," Li said finally, shaking his head in wonder, "is completely unfair." "Totally unfair," Tao agreed. "The Messiah deserves his nickname," Anwar added solemnly. The academy awaited. The nobility ceremony was approaching, and after that would come everything he'd been building toward: real territory, political responsibilities, and the power to finally pursue his objectives without restrictions. "Ren," Leora called, "are you ready?" Ren quickly boarded the carriage, grateful for the excuse to escape all this. The last thing he saw before the carriage pulled away were the faces of his 3 friends, showing envy, amazement, and amusement. The 3 friends remained contemplating their own much simpler lives, deciding that envying Ren was justified after all. The halfway point, and with it came a total, almost extreme change in the kingdom's educational system. Having reached this milestone, the midpoint of their education, young people entered a period of intensive preparation for adult life that they would attain at the year's end. The shift was as dramatic as moving from childhood to adolescence. This year's classes differed dramatically from previous years, focusing much more on practical application and social roles, leaving regular classes almost entirely behind. No more theoretical lectures about beast biology or historical battles. Now it was all about real-world application, about proving you could function in the complex machinery of the kingdom's social and political structures. Once they reached 6th year, students would be considered adults with defined roles in society. Not only students anymore, but half-functioning members of the hierarchy. As Ren had already noticed many times in past years' tournaments, students from 6th to 8th year were rarely found within the academy's walls. They spent most of their time fulfilling collection missions in dangerous territories, guard duties at border posts, and other responsibilities that solidified their place in the kingdom's hierarchy. They returned only for evaluations and special training sessions. But before reaching that point, before being able to call themselves upper-grade students, with the respect that title commanded, the 5th year brought with it a series of tests that would determine everything about their futures. These important tests were administered by the most influential academic organizations of the 3 largest academies in the kingdom. Each institution brought its own standards, its own expectations, and its own biases. These institutions cooperated as a large collegiate body to finally determine the results of this important transitional year's tests. The cooperation was supposed to ensure fairness, though everyone knew politics still played a role. In the end, nobles would earn their official place in the nobility, not just the courtesy titles their families granted them, but real legal standing, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. And warriors would have a clearly defined hierarchy based on demonstrated merit rather than family connections. And not only that, this was considered one of the most important years because the 3 academies took advantage of this transition to compete with each other. Rankings were published, reputations were made or broken. The academies maintained a competitive level and a spirit of improvement both among the institutions and among individual students, an environment where excellence was demanded and mediocrity was visible to everyone. So basically, Larissa summarized after explaining all this to Ren while they traveled in the carriage, her hands gesturing as she organized the complex information. The 5th year is when all your rewards become official. Ren nodded, processing the information. The carriage swayed gently as it moved through the city streets, the clip-clop of hooves providing a rhythmic background to their conversation. He had understood this year would be different, but had not fully grasped the magnitude of the transition. Larissa studied him, her blue eyes sharp and wide open despite the soft afternoon light filtering through the carriage windows. "So, are you ready for the nobility ascription protocol?" Ren blinked, his brain catching on the unfamiliar term like a foot on a root. "The what?" he asked. Leora began laughing from her seat, a genuine burst of mirth that made her cover her mouth with her hand. Luna simply covered her mouth to hide a smile, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. The maids and guards exchanged glances, clearly enjoying Ren's obvious confusion. Even Marco and Shizu, normally stoic, had slight smiles playing at their lips. "The ascription protocol," Larissa repeated, her expression becoming more serious as she leaned forward slightly. Her future husband would have to rise in nobility rank to be able to properly steal her from the royal family, so this was important. After thinking this, she blushed slightly, hoping the others would not notice. She continued, "Ren, this year won't be anything like the previous ones." "I got that," Ren responded, feeling a growing apprehension that settled in his stomach like a stone. The way they were all looking at him suggested he was about to learn something he really did not want to know. But what exactly is this ascription protocol? It's the formal process by which nobility candidates are evaluated, categorized, and finally integrated into the official noble hierarchy, Larissa explained with the tone of someone reciting from a manual she'd been forced to memorize. The nobility lessons for future nobles this year are strict and tedious, so it's best you're prepared for what's coming. Ren felt his stomach sink further, like dropping into a pit with no visible bottom. How strict? Full-time surveillance strict. There's a system of personal tutors for this year. You'll have an assigned tutor from the academy, Larissa continued. In your case, probably Zhao, since he's been handling your lessons with Arturo. But you'll also have a tutor from another school. Why 2 tutors? Ren asked, genuinely confused. Was not one person telling him what to do enough? To avoid favoritism or corruption and nepotism, Luna responded. It's part of the inter-academic cross-verification system established by the Royal Educational Consortium. The what? Ren looked between the 3 girls, clearly lost. His expression was that of someone who'd just been told they'd need to learn an entirely new language overnight. Mayo laughed from her position near the carriage door, unable to contain herself. Royal Educational Consortium? Are you really using those terms with him? It's the official name, Luna defended, straightening in her seat with the dignity of someone who took these things seriously. And he needs to familiarize himself with academic bureaucratic terminology if he's going to navigate this successfully. Honestly, Ren said, sighing long and talking slowly, I feel like I have no idea what you're talking about. All the girls in the carriage laughed, the sound filling the enclosed space. Even the normally stoic guards smiled, their professional masks cracking. The Ren who knew everything, who could calculate elemental synergies instantly and devise revolutionary cultivation methods, was finally showing a more normal side, a blind spot that made him seem human again. Larissa sighed deeply, recognizing she would have to simplify or risk completely overwhelming him before they even reached the academy. Okay, let's leave formal terms aside for now. The basics are this. Since you'll receive a noble rank, you'll have to take special classes to pass the noble protocol exams. More noble stuff. Ren's shoulders slumped slightly. Like what classes? Like formal etiquette, how to stand, sit, eat, speak in different contexts. Precedence at social events, who enters a room first, who sits where, who speaks when. Territory management, tax collection, dispute resolution, resource allocation, noble law, the legal frameworks governing noble conduct and responsibilities, genealogical history of important houses, who's related to whom and why that matters, official document design protocols, how to format requests, grants, declarations. Larissa counted on her fingers, each point making Ren's eyes widen further. With each term, Ren's eyes widened more, like someone watching a mountain grow before them. Wait. Document design. Genialo what? And that's just the theoretical component, Leora added with obvious amusement, clearly enjoying watching Ren squirm. There are also practical components. Practical how? Ren's voice had gone slightly higher. Organization of formal events. You'll actually have to plan and execute a noble gathering. Mediation debates for simulated territorial disputes. You'll play both arbiter and advocate. Administrative audits of fictional properties. You'll review made-up estates and find errors or inefficiencies. Luna continued the list where Larissa had stopped, her voice taking on a lecturer's cadence. Ren looked genuinely terrified now, his face paling. Audits and disputes? The first is mainly paperwork, Mayo said casually, waving a hand dismissively. Mountains and mountains of boring paperwork that makes your eyes cross. The second is twisting things to your advantage. Mountains and mountains of empty talk, where you say a lot without saying anything. With the mansion you got, you must have done the patrimony verification documentation, Matilda added with a more serious tone. It's the same thing, but for many more things. Lineage certifications proving your family line, territorial claim validations showing your right to lands, rank elevation justifications explaining why you deserve a higher position. Stop! Ren raised his hands in surrender, his voice almost desperate. Certifications of what? Justifications of what elevation? The 12 girls looked at him with expressions mixing amusement with genuine sympathy. It was like watching a brilliant scholar discover they'd have to take a class in professional basket weaving. Oh, Ren, Leora murmured, shaking her head with fond exasperation. You really know nothing about high society, do you? I know a lot about other things that seem less boring to me, like beasts, Ren defended. His pride stung. I can tell you exactly how to optimize evolution based on elemental affinities and growth patterns. I can calculate synergies between multiple beasts in my head. But this, he gestured vaguely toward Larissa and the invisible weight of bureaucracy she represented. This is a completely different language. It's like you're speaking in code designed specifically to confuse people. Maria laughed softly, the sound gentle. It's adorable in a way. And terrifying, Hikari added, her smile sympathetic. Considering he's going to have to pass formal evaluations all year for all those enormous rewards of his. Ren visibly paled, the blood draining from his face. Evaluations all year. Multiple ones, Larissa confirmed with the air of delivering bad news. The Nobility Accreditation Committee administers at least 7 separate evaluations of the common curriculum for each reward during the transition year. 7, Ren repeated weakly, the number echoing in his head like a death sentence. 7 separate evaluations. At least 7, Luna clarified, holding up fingers to count. And there are also supplementary evaluations if your performance on the main ones generates concerns about jurisdictional competence. Competence what? The words were becoming meaningless sounds. Jurisdictional, Luna repeated patiently, as if explaining to a child. The demonstrated capacity to exercise noble authority over assigned territory, according to regional statutes and customary expectations of aristocratic management. Ren stared at her, his expression showing both disbelief and dawning horror. Luna, I swear you just made up those words. Everyone burst into laughter, the sound filling the carriage and spilling out into the street beyond.